Every year, as night falls on the 19th of May, the air outside a remote English manor turns ice cold. According to local lore, a carriage driven by a headless horseman arrives from the darkness. Inside sits a woman dressed in pure white, drenched in blood, holding her own screaming, decapitated head. This phantom is said to be the spirit of Queen Anne Boleyn, returning to her verified birthplace, Blickling Hall. England has no shortage of grisly history or haunted locations, yet Anne's restless spirit has earned the title of the most traveled ghost in the country. Why her? To understand that, we have to look past the supernatural and examine the actual Tudor era. This was a period of intense political upheaval, completely dominated by the supreme authority of King Henry VIII. And when the historical Anne Boleyn joined his English court in 1522, she stood out immediately. She had spent her youth being educated in the vibrant Renaissance courts of Europe. There, she absorbed radical ideas that championed reading the Bible in people's native language and questioned the absolute authority of the Pope in Rome. She returned to England an intellectual force, armed with a sophisticated wit that the traditional English court had never seen. The gruesome folklore of a screaming phantom often overshadows the woman herself, a politician whose religious and political convictions eventually ended England's centuries-long subservience to Rome. Today, ghost hunters claim her spirit peacefully drifts through the gardens of Hever Castle, her childhood home. But historical records show this estate as the staging ground for King Henry's obsessive courtship. He bombarded her with letters, declaring his love and sending her the spoils of his hunts, desperately trying to persuade her to become his mistress. There was, of course, a massive political roadblock. Henry was legally married to the deeply faithful and highly respected Queen Catherine of Aragon. Firmly, Anne refused him. She had already watched the king take her own sister, Mary, as a mistress, only to discard her when he lost interest. Anne issued an ultimatum. She would only accept his advances if he offered a legitimate marriage and the crown. This map shows the rigid authority tying the English crown to the papacy. The Pope refused to annul Henry's marriage. To secure Anne, Henry severed those ties entirely, breaking from Rome and installing himself as supreme head of a newly independent Church of England. Anne's ambition secured her the throne, but the cost was the total destruction of the country's existing religious establishment. To celebrate his new queen, Henry renovated vast sections of his favorite residence, Hampton Court Palace. He even embedded their intertwined initials, A and H, into the architecture to solidify their union. But that union came with a rigid expectation. Henry had upended the church to marry her, and the unspoken price for that loyalty was the delivery of a healthy male heir. In 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. A series of tragic miscarriages followed. As her pregnancies failed, Henry's patience evaporated, and his attention shifted entirely to her lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour. Henry wanted out of the marriage. His chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, understood the assignment and recognized that a permanent, indisputable solution was required. Cromwell orchestrated a rapid, brutal legal strategy. He fabricated completely baseless charges against the queen, accusing her of adultery, incest, and treason. There was no supernatural curse at work here. Anne's downfall was a highly effective political purge, executed by a king willing to do whatever it took to secure a son. Found guilty without evidence, Anne was brought by boat down the River Thames, passing through the heavy wooden grating of Traitor's Gate and into her final prison at the Tower of London. On the morning of May 19, 1536, she stepped onto the scaffold. She maintained a calm demeanor and pointedly refused to confess to the false charges, instead stating plainly that she was prepared to die according to the law. A French executioner severed her head with a single stroke of a sword. Because Henry had not even bothered to arrange a proper coffin, her body was hastily stuffed into an empty wooden arrow box for burial. The true horror of her death stems from the cold reality of the event. It was the unchecked absolute power of a monarch, legally murdering his wife. Immediately following her death, Henry began a systematic campaign to wipe Anne from existence. He ordered her portraits destroyed and had stonemasons chisel her family insignias right out of the walls at Hampton Court. But the public memory refused to let her vanish. Decades and centuries later, reports of her ghost began to emerge around the grounds of the Tower of London. In 1864, an officer testified at a military court-martial that he watched a guard charge at a headless white apparition. The soldier fainted in terror when his bayonet passed completely through the mist. Another famous account from a Tower guard describes peering through a window late at night to see Anne's spirit leading a ghostly procession of knights and ladies through the Chapel Royal. Despite Henry's efforts to bury her story, these sightings kept her name in the public consciousness for centuries. The legends ensured that the queen he tried to delete remained an unshakable fixture of English history. Yet her actual victory over Henry requires no belief in the supernatural. He failed to erase her for one very simple, human reason. Her daughter survived. The baby girl who had been such a disappointment to the king grew up to become Queen Elizabeth I. She reigned as one of history's most powerful monarchs, firmly establishing the reformist legacy her mother had championed. The folklore of the headless queen persists, but her most tangible mark on history was the daughter she left behind, a monarch who secured the very reforms Anne had risked her life to introduce.